Evergreen Show, taking your business from seed to sapling to towering giant. With your hosts, best-selling author and business growth experts Noah Fleming and Sean Veltman. This is the only show that gives you proven, pragmatic, and immediately applicable business growth strategies every week in 15 minutes or less. Here's Noah and Sean.
Well, hello, everybody. We're back to another episode of the Evergreen Show. This is your host, Noah Fleming, with my co-host, Mr. Sean Veltman. Sean, you know the question. Where are you today? What's going on? Give us the weather.
I am in a winter wonderland today. You know, we're recording in early October, and I got more snow than I would like to have at the moment.
Oh, this weather's killing me, my friend. It's I was in Florida last week, which was beautiful. And, you know, it was just after all the storms went through. And so any of our listeners, I hope you all made it through those storms okay. I know there was quite a bit of damage down there, but boy, they have some nice weather down there. So, Sean, today we are talking about something that is near and dear to our hearts and near and dear to the work that we do with a lot of our clients. And I want to start by phrasing or posing a question to our listeners. And the question is this: how do you know when a customer stops doing business with you? Now, if you are a small business and you have, you know, a few clients or a handful of clients, then it's very easy to know. But for a lot of our clients, you know, those that sell consumables or those that sell products where they're constantly reordering, it's sometimes hard for those clients to tell when a customer is no longer a customer. And so we dive deep into the world of what we refer to as exception reporting. And so, Sean, I'm going to pass it to you now and let you tell the audience what this is all about and why it's important.
You know, I think that question alone is something that if everybody listening right now, just take some time and think about, how do you know when a customer is no longer a customer? What's your criteria there? Having a solid demarcation point for when you no longer classify somebody as a customer is an incredibly important exercise to go through, because it helps you take every one of the next steps that are important. And here's why it's so important. If you don't know when a customer is no longer a customer, then you're going to have a really out of whack perception of how much opportunity you have. Right? If you look back and say, oh, you know, we've done business with 1 million people over the last 10 years. We have 1 million customers, and yet only 100 of them are actively doing business with you today. It's going to be pretty hard to get any return on investment from a mailing to all 1 million of them, or for any sort of efforts, because the vast majority of them are no longer your customers. So, you know, as Noah said, we do a lot of work with people in consumables, you know, business to business. The range is all over the place, right? Sometimes you can have a really healthy relationship when a customer is only buying from you once every 2 to 5 years. And other times, if they're not buying every 2 to 4 months, then they're likely never, ever coming back. So having an understanding of what this looks like in your company, in your industry, is incredibly important.
So I think, you know, one of the key challenges we see, and I'm sure our listeners will relate, is that we often end up looking at customer data and all of a sudden realizing, well, you know, it's October, and this customer up between January and October has only spent $170,000 with us, but last year and the year before they spent well over $300,000. And so I think what we're trying to say, and you know, the area where we end up doing a lot of work, is that this is a point where it's too late. In many respects, that customer has already shown you the signs that their behavior is changing, something has changed, and so it's too late to look at this point and ask, you know, what can we do about it? So why don't you tell our listeners again how an exception report might help in this, and then I want to make sure we also cover other areas of where exception reporting is important, because it's not just that key question that I want to talk about today. It's this whole idea of what the purpose of an exception report is.
Absolutely. And so as it relates to attrition specifically, I often think of the old saying here that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? If you've got customers and you know that they should be purchasing from you once a month, or that your best customers purchase from you once every 45 days, and you're only going through and doing a sweep every 6 months or once a year to try to identify customers that you've lost and bring them back, Well, you're way behind here. They've already picked a new vendor, a new supplier, a new partner. And so when you go back to those customers, you're not going back with a good relationship. You're not going back as the incumbent. You're going back having to get in as a competitor again. And that's tough. So what an exception report does is it lets you say, all right, I know that I expect to see some level of purchase every 30 days. Then every day you should be getting a report that shows you customers who are 31 days or more since their last purchase. And this should be a giant red alarm to everybody in your customer service and your sales departments that these are the top priority customers to get in touch with. Because if you don't address this immediately, then you're likely going to lose them.
So let's talk about some of the other work that we do in the area of exception reporting, and let's give our listeners some practical ideas of ways they can use exception reports. I know some of my favorites in specifically with our B2B clients answer the very simple question of what was supposed to happen and did it actually happen? And then giving management the report or the tool to show them, here are all the exceptions where this didn't happen. We've talked about this before. One of my favorite examples of this was with a $60 million construction firm where they knew they weren't following up on an additional $60 million worth of business every year. And so we built a very simple report that provided the exception of saying, here are all the leads we did not follow up on. And we talked about this last week where we talked about, or maybe not last week, another week where we talked about leads are leaking and leads are falling through the cracks and how you can use exception reports in those areas as well. Sean, you're a master at implementing these types of things and having these insights with many of our clients. Can you share some other examples of where these are important?
Absolutely. It's really anything that you're thinking about in terms of management. You and I have talked about this before. No, you're managing activity. And so anything that is important enough for you to spend your time and mental effort on can have an exception report behind it. So, we talked here about customer purchase cycles, and that is a way for you to have this triggered as soon as it's important. Activity is a great one. There's so many different types of activity, right? We might say with a sales team, one of the things that we do often is we have salespeople themselves commit to their activity levels and say that they're going to do X number of calls per week and visits per week and research on new clients, whatever it is. The important thing here is we're not telling them what they need to do. We're getting them to tell us what's reasonable, what's consistent. And so long as it makes sense, we let them have those numbers. And then the exception report that goes to their sales manager is just whether or not they hit their own goals. And if they don't hit their goals, then that's a discussion point. If they dramatically go over their goals on a repeated basis, that's another discussion. We talk about setting larger goals and not padding things and all of that.
One of the favorite reports that I also have in sort of the work that we do is we see a lot of clients, a lot of businesses that think they're getting the next latest and greatest CRM, and they throw this thing in place and they say, okay, salespeople go. And some use it, some don't, and there's some sort of fumbling. And one of the reports that we put in when we build a CRM or use that tool with a client is again, you talked about activity, but very simple things like who hasn't logged in for a while and why haven't they logged in? Or has there been any note activity put into the CRM? These are all the types of things that companies miss when they implement these types of endeavors. And so they expect that everybody's just going to, follow the new way of doing things. And what happens is they don't. And so you need that level of accountability there for all of these specific areas. Is there any other areas, Sean, that you really like?
There are, but first I want to touch back on that point you just made because I think it's incredibly important, is that, you and I often call this the abdication of management responsibility, right? Managers will spend money on a new tool or process, or they put a new initiative in place, and then they say, go do this, and then never follow up with anybody to make sure that it's being done. And so, we talked about this in the This Too Shall Pass podcast. So often people rightly say, well, look, nobody's checking up, nobody's paying attention. It's more work for me. If I just keep my head down, this will be forgotten about in 6 months. What exception reports allow you to do is to immediately identify people who are non-compliant with the new initiative and address them immediately, rather than 3 months later or 6 months later finding out that what you hoped being done wasn't done.
So it gives management a real pulse on the day-to-day activities. And again, I think, sometimes we run into fear of, is this going to be micromanagement? Are we looking too much upon what they're doing? And the answer is no, this is management, right? This is management. You are not, as you mentioned, you're not abdicating your responsibility. You're saying, these are the new expectations, and we're going to make sure that you follow them. And sometimes they're not new expectations. Sometimes these are the way we've been doing things for 50 years. Now we're just putting in a mechanism to make sure they're actually getting done, because what we've realized is they're not getting done. And so
exactly.
This to me is such a powerful concept. And so as I start to think about, what our challenge would be for this week, and I'm sure you're going to have some, brilliant idea, but I'm just going to give my sort of 2 cents on this. I think the key is to think about, maybe just one area of your business where there's something that you expect is being done regularly, and then ask yourself, are you entirely confident that it's getting done? If you're that confident, what proof, what evidence do you have that that's being done? If you're not entirely confident, I would suggest this is an area where you need some sort of automated exception reporting. And you need the ability to catch these things sooner rather than later, sooner than a customer, no longer being a customer 6 months later, sooner than nobody using the tool that you've just put into place. So that's my challenge for this week. Do you have something else?
I think that's a great challenge. I think one of the key things that you said there, and I just want to highlight it for everybody, is what do I expect is being done, and how do I know it's being done? How would I know, right? If it's not belief, it's not faith, how would you check it? And how can you automate the checking of it so that you're only notified of it when it goes wrong? So this is, when we talk about management versus micromanagement, one of my favorite things about exception reporting is that they only get triggered when something that you're not expecting happens, or when something goes wrong. So if everybody's following what they should be doing, if your customers are chugging along and buying every 28 days, you're never going to get a report about these things. You only get a report when there's a deviation that is strong enough, as you've defined it, to warrant your attention. And then you can pay attention to it. So it takes out this idea of I'm micromanaging by watching you every day and making sure that you're hitting these keys in the right order. No, an exception report only gets triggered when something is wrong, and that's where it's your job as management to step in and make it right.
So we talk about this a lot. Well, I talked about this a lot in my first book in Evergreen, where we talked about tripwires and, equating them to this idea of the Mission Impossible movie alarm where Tom Cruise is dangling from the building. And if your customer triggers one of these alarms, or something triggers an alarm, are you going to have the ability to know that that's happened? And so this is really the key to success in a number of areas. Again, on our podcast about leads leaking, right? Sean mentioned you're only going to know about this when the exception happens. Well, if you say we follow up on 100% of our leads, unless you actually have the evidence and the proof that that's happening, this is a great area for an exception report, to give you a report at the end of the week and say, here's the 37 leads that we actually didn't follow up on. And then you get to ask the simple question of why not? So
exactly. Follow-up is such a wonderful area for exception reporting. If you're doing things right, if you've paid any attention to us or anybody else in the sales field for the last 30 years, you've probably recognized the importance of having a CRM and tracking what's going on, whether it's from your salespeople, your customer service people. If you don't have it in place, don't feel too bad. Many don't. But when you get it in place, you can start putting exception reports like this in and saying, I expect one follow-up every 3 days for 2 weeks after a new lead comes in. And you can immediately see who's doing that and who's not.
Yeah, and I think, we're just about out of time here. I want to make sure the key point there, too, is, you mentioned a lot of companies don't have these CRMs or anything like that. Let's not mistake that you can probably get by without a CRM in many cases. Possibly more important are these types of exception reports.
Absolutely.
We can build a sales process. We can help you with that, but you need these things in place to show you that the things you expect to happen are actually happening. So that's all I got, Sean. I think that was a good one. That's a favorite discussion of ours. I know that will come up over and over again in various themes in various different ways. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think that covers it really nicely. We will be back with more about exception reporting, but until then, this is quite a bit to chew on.
Okay, everybody. So you know the routine. If you love the podcast, please feel free to share it with your colleagues, your peers, anyone else in your company. I know our stuff gets passed around a lot, and we appreciate that. Reviews are important, but they're certainly not the end of the world. And the podcast is now available on iTunes and Android and just about everywhere else, I think. So if you run into anything, if you have any questions, as always, you can get in touch with us. Just go to my website, noahfleming.com, hit the contact button, and away we go. Otherwise, we will see you next Monday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us each and every week for another great episode of The Evergreen Show with your hosts, Noah Fleming and Sean Veltman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on The Evergreen Show.